Good evening. My name is Greg Maisel, and on behalf of the International March of the Living, I would like to welcome you to the 2022 Let There Be Light program, remembering Kristallnacht around the world. Let There Be Light is a global educational initiative launched by the International March of the Living 3 years ago on the 82nd anniversary of Kristallnacht to combat the rising tide of intolerance and anti-Semitism around the world. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, saw the destruction of thousands of synagogues and Jewish institutions all across Germany and Austria 84 years ago. But the world has still not learnt the lessons of the past. Attacks on houses of worship of all faiths continuously occur, time and time again. Our global campaign of unity, Let There Be Light, encouraged individuals and communities across the globe to unite in solidarity against anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, and intolerance by keeping the lights on in houses of worship, in public institutions, and in private homes around the world on the night of November the 9th. Since we launched the campaign in 2020, we have reached millions of people and brought together over 1,000 houses of worship of all faiths and institutions and partners from over 75 countries. This year, in commemoration of the 84th anniversary of Kristallnacht, Let There Be Light events were held in Vienna, in Jerusalem, and in Dubai. The Dubai event was the first ever Holocaust commemoration in the Arab world on Kristallnacht, with the participation of a Holocaust survivor, a living witness to the past, a powerful symbol of reconciliation, and an important step in widening the impact of Holocaust education. We are pleased to bring you the highlights from these moving commemorations, along with testimonies from Holocaust survivors Eve Kugler and Walter Bingham, first-hand witnesses to the events of Kristallnacht. Also on November the 8th, the International March of the Living streamed the Kristallnacht memorial service from Toronto in Canada and in Düsseldorf, Germany, inspired by a March of the Living commissioned film. It was the right thing to do. The short documentary tells the story of a remarkable act of courage by a German woman toward a Jewish family in Düsseldorf during the Nazi era. We will bring you highlights from those moving events as well. Before we proceed with our program, we would like to thank our generous sponsors: the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience at Rutgers University, the Neischloss Foundation, the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum in the United Arab Emirates, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, Meta, and the Austrian Jewish community. In a moment, we will take you to selected moments from these international Kristallnacht commemorations. But first, please turn your attention to an important message from Paul Miller, founder of the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience at Rutgers University, one of the sponsors of this evening's broadcast.
To begin, let me take you back to Krakow, the city in Poland where the march participants gather each year for Yom HaShoah to begin their march from Auschwitz to Birkenau. Our return is also to the year 1936, where following the pogrom in Prishtik, the writer Mordechai Gebirtag wrote the poem Es brennt, which many of us read on Yom Kippur. Es brennt, Brüderlech, se brennt. It's burning, brother, it's burning. And you stand and look just so, you with folded hands, and you stand and look just so, while our shtetl burns. I said the words, never again, as many of us have said it, over and over and over again, for so many years. But we can no longer simply say, never again, and move on with our lives as if everything is fine. We know all too well the meaning of the attacks at places like Toulouse and Paris, France, Overland Park, Kansas, Brussels, Belgium, Oak Creek, Wisconsin, the Nationalist Socialist underground murders in Germany, the Washington, D.C. shooting, the attack in Colorado Springs, the marches and violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Whitefish, Montana, the slaughter of the Rohingya sect, the horrible attack on the synagogue in Pittsburgh, and it goes on. Communities around the globe are under attack and saying never again, praying for it to cease, and talking about the horror is not enough. Communities are in danger, and talking, praying, and resolutions, no matter how well-meaning, are simply not enough. Words, unfortunately, do not stop bullets nor shield communities from suicide bombers. The time for action has come. My friends, I am not naive. I know, as all of you know, that the ideology, the hatred, and violent extremism spurred on by the socioeconomic conditions of our time, not to mention the enormous dislocation of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, as a result of national strife, as well as, of course, the hatred of religious fanatics, all of which leads to the attacks, will not abate soon. As I wrote these words for tonight, I was reminded of the preference of Daniel Jonah Goldhagen's book about anti-Semitism, The Devil That Never Dies. He wrote, "The devil with us for 2,000 years is back. He has so perverted people's sensibilities that he has convinced them to brutalize and torture masses of people in the name of goodness and in the name of God. The devil, after a period of relative quiescence, has reappeared, flexes his muscles again, and stalks the world with ever more confidence, power, and followers. The devil is not a he, but an it." And my friends, next to anti-Semitism, we can add the word evil, which together are the attack triggers for the terrible, terrible, terrible attacks we are witnessing today. I believe, however, with all my heart, that in order to blunt this attack and this attack on our communities, we must all, every one of us, to the maximum extent possible, do whatever we can, no matter how little we think each of us can do, to help stop this blight upon the world, if we want our children, our grandchildren, and generations yet to come to be able to live and to pray in shalom, in peace. The philosopher Edmund Burke warned us all when he said, "All that is necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing." I know that the leaders of the International March and everyone who is watching are not, in the words of Gebirtag's poem, "Stehen mit verlegte Hand," standing with folded hands. By reminding everyone of the past, so that the past is not repeated, the words I began with, "never again," will finally once and for all mean never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for your moving words, for your partnership with the International March of the Living, for your generosity and vision, and for your extraordinary commitment to Holocaust education. As we move into the future, fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors, the first-hand witnesses to the greatest crime in human history, will be able to tell their story. We are now privileged to hear a few words from one of those eyewitnesses, 98-year-old Walter Bingham, who will share with us his recollections from his childhood in Germany during those terrible years.
I was born in Germany in 1924. I started school in 1930 at the age of 6, and for 3 years I was treated like all other boys until Hitler came to power in 1933, when everything changed. I saw the infamous book burning by the Nazis, and my father was rounded up and deported to Poland and killed in the Warsaw Ghetto. At the age of 14, I was a witness to Kristallnacht, when synagogues across Germany, Austria, and German-occupied Czechoslovakia were burned to the ground. I saw the build-up of senseless hatred that led to the worst crime in human history, the Holocaust. Now, as I near the age of 100, with anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry again on the rise worldwide, I implore you to do your part to ensure the lessons of the past are never forgotten.
Thank you, Walter. We will now take you to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, for a Kristallnacht ceremony that was held adjacent to walls of the Old City, where messages of peace and hope from Israeli President Isaac Herzog and Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid were projected on the walls. 2 Holocaust survivors, veteran journalist Walter Bingham and David Chikovitz, both witnesses to the event on Kristallnacht, were honored at the event. Included in the audience were over 60 young high school students who recently made Aliyah from Russia and the Ukraine, fleeing from that war-torn region.
ריבונו של עולם אם נדבר גלויות לפעמים אין לי כוח בעולמך להיות אנא מפניך אסתתר מה איתן מה אצטדק מה אדבר חנון ורחום אין לפניך גלוי כאן יהודי שהלכות השערה ותלוי נלחם בעצבות בייאוש המכרסם כתולד השמחה נסתלקה ממני וגם הדם קולות מהעבר לא חשים לי לעצור אבל אני מוסיף בחושך לחתור
We are looking forward for the future to cooperate for peace. We cooperate for hope. No more anti-Semitism and no more hate and no more racism in the world. And today we came to remember the past. We came to learn. We came to teach. We came to deliver the message. Let there be light. Here from Jerusalem, together with Vienna and Dubai, we should deliver this important message. ולא יישא גוי גוי חרב. Thank you very much.
We now take you to Vienna, Austria, where some 1,500 people participated in a Light of Hope march from the Heldenplatz up to the Judenplatz, organized by the Jewish youth of Vienna. The march included some 350 March of the Living Austrian student alumni, a delegation of March of the Living Hungary, and Holocaust survivors Helga Feldner-Butzlin and Rosa Landler. The main ceremony at the Judenplatz featured remarks from Oscar Deutsch, the president of the Jewish community of Vienna, Mordechai Rotgold, Israeli ambassador to Austria, and Michel Gourari, the director of the European March of the Living.
So for me, it's a personal legacy. My grandfather, Michel Gourari, was caught in the Kaiserwald concentration camp when he managed to flee out from Vienna to Riga. And then, unfortunately, on the 22nd of April 1945, he was shot dead on his second death march. And for me, to be active in the March of the Living, it's to bear the legacy of my grandfather and so many other Jews who were assassinated during the Shoah.
It's amazing that so many people are coming today, even within this cold weather. It's amazing that so many people are showing up and being allies. And I hope that those people that are here and those people that could not be here support us also for the rest of the year and for the rest of the next generations to come, and not just today.
So we must remember so we shape a better future for our children.
For me, it's really important that those things never happen again, and that we are remembering, that we don't forget, and that we fight against anti-Semitism and, in general, hate in our society.
Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is growing in Europe, anti-Semitism is growing in North America, everywhere. And we have to remember and to show what happened during the Shoah in order to fight anti-Semitism, to fight the growing anti-Semitism.
The Jewish community, along with other groups and organizations, are marching along the streets of Vienna, and we are setting a sign. We are commemorating the November night of 1938.
We now take you to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, where in an historic moment, the city hosted its first ever Holocaust commemoration on the eve of Kristallnacht. Please turn your attention to remarks from Dr. Shmuel Rosenman, chairman of the International March of the Living.
Shalom to all. Assalamu alaikum. Dear friends, tonight to remember the time when darkness overcame the light, when the only light was the flames of hatred which engulfed the synagogues, Jewish homes, schools and businesses. A night when the glasses were shattered and the world torn apart. A night when innocents were chased and murdered. A night when evil rejoiced. A night when humanity stood by, turned blind eye, stayed silent. Even amidst outrage, the world do nothing to stop it. The silence enabled the Holocaust. If the world had stopped it then, the Shoah could have been prevented. There is a direct link between the flames of the Kristallnacht to the gas chambers, which were built few years later. In 1938, the crematoria were not yet constructed, but the Kristallnacht, their ovens were lit. Today, we say never again. And we say, Abadan, Yani Abadan. But we must more than say it. We must mean it. Anti-Semitism is not things of the past. It is more prevalent today. Indeed, so many today fail to even recognize anti-Semitism as racism. We'll never relent the standing up against ignorance and hatred against the Jews and against any human being. One strong weapon in this war is education. For 3.5 decades, we have brought hundreds of thousands of young Jews and non-Jews to follow the path walked by millions of Jews across Europe who were murdered by the Nazis. We bring them to the camps, to the ghettos, to the crematoria. We show them the world that was lost in the flames. And we teach and educate about the danger of racism and hatred. We, the International March of the Living, are determined to seek justice for the memory of the victims, to honor the precious survivors, to fight hate in all forms, and to raise loud and clear voice against Holocaust deniers from all kinds and all sorts. Today, we are here to help to promote understanding about the Holocaust among a great society and caring, open, tolerant people. The lessons of the Holocaust are not just for Europe. They are for the entire world.
This event could not have taken place without the Abraham Accords, which opened the door to a warm peace where Jews and Arab get to know each other and honor the other's past. We will now hear remarks from His Excellency Ahmed Obaid Al-Mansouri, and Eitan Naishlos, two people whose courage and vision made this evening's commemoration possible. His Excellency Ahmed Obaid Al-Mansouri, our esteemed host from the United Arab Emirates, is the founder of the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum in Dubai, as well as founder of the first Holocaust Memorial Gallery in the Arab and Muslim world. Eitan Naishlos is the president and founder of the Naishlos Foundation, which advocates for Israel, combats anti-Semitism, and provides Holocaust education. He is a member of the third generation and a grandson of Holocaust survivor Tamara Zisselman. On the 2022 March of the Living in Auschwitz-Birkenau, His Excellency Ahmad Obaid Al-Mansouri and Eitan Naishlos lit a memorial torch at the closing ceremony, representing the hope of the third generation and new alliances to promote tolerance between different faiths.
It is our profound beliefs and our readiness to defend the immortal declaration that all men are created equally, that they are endowed by their creators with certain alienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we hold fast to these truths, we will find the inspiration and the power to prevent inhumanity on the face of the earth. As with all forms of discrimination and intolerance, anti-Semitism must be countered through education within the framework of human rights and global citizenship. This is an immediate security imperative and a long-term educational commitment. One day the world will be at peace. One day we hope Jews won't be remembered as victims. One day we know that we'll be remembered as heroes. That day is today. Thank you very much.
We are here to remember. We are here to stand up for what we believe in, for tolerance and for the good of humankind. I'm thankful to be here in the United Arab Emirates under the shaded palm of the Abraham Accords. As we come together, Jews, Muslims, Christians, people of all faiths, we're here together to spread this message across the region and the world with the brave and courageous Emirati leadership. And of our generation, a generation committed to tolerance and acceptance of mutual respect and understanding. A generation who can bring much light to the world, just as we did, my honorable friend, when we stood together at the gates of hell at Auschwitz concentration camp and lit the torch of remembrance side by side, making history together. My grandmother of blessed memory, Tamara Zisselman, endured the evil of the Holocaust. As a young girl in Belarus, the Jews of her town were rounded up and murdered in the surrounding woods. She was hidden by a Christian family, the Chodaseviches. At times, she had to hide in the chimney breast, so scared she couldn't speak, so scared that she couldn't breathe. Her fears were realized. She was found by the Nazis. She was sent to a labor camp, and the Chodaseviches were taken to the very spot where the rest of my grandmother's family and the Jewish community were murdered. And together with their baby in their arms, were also murdered by the Nazis in cold blood. This became known to me after my grandmother's passing, when I came across a shoebox containing her testimony and story of survival, a story which I knew so little about growing up. This became the inspiration behind the work that I'm pursuing today through the Naishlos Foundation and in partnership with the March of the Living, promoting Holocaust education to the next generation, the future of humanity. My grandmother's story is one of the many in the endless testimonies of the Holocaust, some of which were never able to be told, some of which were never shared. Yet, even as the testimonies fade, sadly, the hatred has not faded. Anti-Semitism and discrimination in all its forms have not faded. It is as bold and brazen and hate-filled as ever. So, on this night, on Kristallnacht, the night of the November pogrom, we bring voices like Eve's to new audiences. On this night, we work together, Jews, Muslims, and Christians. We send a message to the world that we will remember, we will teach the lessons of the past. Never again means never again. So let there be light. Thank you.
German-born Holocaust survivor Eve Kugler was only 7 years of age when Nazi thugs attacked her home, her family, and her community. But she clearly remembers every detail, which she shared with young Muslim and Jewish students during her visit to Dubai. We too are now privileged to hear her remarks.
I am one of the very few fortunate Jewish people who survived the Holocaust. So today I am able to tell you my personal experience of living through the Kristallnacht, as well as living under Hitler for 5 years before, and how against the odds, I and my entire family subsequently survived. I was born in 1931, 2 years before Hitler came to power. My family consisted of my mom, my dad, my 2 sisters, and my beloved grandfather, who also lived with us. My father had a business which occupied the ground floor of the apartment building in which we lived. We were really an ordinary, observant Jewish family. When Hitler came to power, immediately signs appeared all over our city: Juden verboten, Jewish people forbidden. The powers that be in our city created a circular in which they listed the Jewish businesses all over our city, and it said, don't buy from Jewish people, don't give your money from Jewish people. My father's name was on that list. From the very beginning, we were persecuted Jews, and people stopped buying from us. They were afraid to buy in a Jewish store. Anti-Semitism became wider. Jewish children like myself were not permitted to play in the local playgrounds. We were bullied in schools. My cousin was called to the front of her class, and the teacher called her a Jewish pig and hit her. Life became very difficult for all of us. My father decided to leave Germany, and he applied for a visa to go to the Jewish homeland, and we were on a list, and when our name came up, we hoped to go. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws were passed, which made life even more systematically difficult, as items upon items were listed of what Jewish people were not allowed to do, who they were not allowed to associate with. We lost our citizenship. It got worse and worse and worse. I want to mention again my darling sister Leah, who was born at home in 1936 on November the 9th, at home because Jewish women were not allowed to give birth in a city hospital. Thank God it all went well. In 1937, great joy. Our name came up. We were about to leave. We were packing, excited, and then we were told by the Jewish authorities, the Jewish agency, that another man lower on the list was to be arrested the next morning, and he received our visa. It was urgent. And this became a pattern. There were always people in imminent danger. You're a businessman. You have nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about. And so we came to the end of October 1938, when on an ordinary afternoon, 2 uniformed Nazis appeared at my father's business and said, "We have come for the old man," my grandfather, my beloved 78-year-old grandfather. He was not at home. The Nazis said, "We will wait for him." And when he came back, my dad could say nothing except, "Papa, you have to go with them. They said it won't be very long." But he didn't come home. He didn't come back, and he didn't come back. My father found out when he went to the police station to see what happened. "You're too late. We've put them all on the train. We are sending them back to Poland, where they came from. We do not want Jews in Germany." And there was nothing that we could do but worry and worry and worry. And 10 days later, in the middle of the night, there was a pounding on the door of our apartment. My dad could not help. He had to open the door or they would have smashed it down. 6 Nazis, including the local police chief, marched into the flat, and they came to arrest my father. My sister Ruth and I stood at our bedroom door as we watched Nazis wander through our home, creating havoc. They turned over furniture, they emptied cupboards, they broke dishes. Horrible noise and clattering until the local police chief pushed my sister and me back into our room, slammed the door into our face, and I was told later that he said to my mom, "The girls don't need to see this." What we did not see was what the Nazis did in my grandfather's room, a very observant Orthodox Jew who owned many sacred Jewish texts, including a Sefer Torah, the scroll that Jewish people read in their services every Saturday, which is the account of the Old Testament. They tore the Sefer Torah to shred. They stamped on his books. His prayer shawl became tatters. Everything that was sacred to Jewish people, they desecrated, destroyed, dirtied. And my father was led out of our home. They slammed the door. My mother sat in a state of shock the entire night. The next morning, the shop assistant rang the doorbell. She was in tears. "You have to come down. You have to come down." And mother threw on some clothes. And when she came downstairs, what she saw was the sidewalk was littered with glass, shards of glass that had come from the window of my father's store, which was broken during the night. The Nazis screamed at a filthy, dirty Jewish woman and clean up the mess. And she spent 2 hours sweeping the sidewalk under the watchful eyes of the Nazis until there was not a shred of glass left on the sidewalk. She went back home, and other Jewish women came and told her that their husbands, fathers, nephews, sons, men between the ages of 16 and 60 had all been arrested. And then my Aunt Fanny came with further terrible news. The synagogue that grandfather had built when he came from Poland late in the 1890s, 40 years earlier, had been torched by the Nazis. The fire brigade watched until there was nothing left but ashes. What shall we do? What shall we do? Where are our men? My mother went across the street to the local police station and asked, "Where is my husband, please?" And she was told, "He is in the concentration camp of Buchenwald. If you want to get him out, you must get him a visa. We don't want Jews in Germany." The Jewish agency could only apologize. There was nothing they could do. My mother spent 4 weeks until she found someone who forged a visa to enable her to go to France. She presented the visa to the police station. My father came home from the camp. Within 3 days, he was gone. And so now my grandfather's gone, my father is gone again, the beginning of a loss to me, a young child, of members of my family disappearing. Hard for me to understand what was happening. A further effect of Kristallnacht was that a short time later, the Nazis in every city, in town and village published a list of names of a few Jewish homes and told the Jewish people, if your name is not on the list, you have to vacate your apartment and go live with somebody who's on the list. Unfortunately, we were not on the list, but fortunately, my mom's father, who lived in another city an hour away, was on the list. We joined my grandfather, Moses, who had already taken in a dozen other Jews who had been made homeless. It was crowded, it was difficult. We were together. It took my mother 6 months to get another visa that enabled us to go to France to join my father. Unfortunately, within a month or so, World War II broke out, and the French arrested my father because he was a German national. He protested. I'm a Jew. I've been in a concentration camp. You are a German citizen. Come with us. Eventually, when Paris fell, the children were evacuated, and I was very fortunate in 1941, along with my sister Ruth, to be able to join a small group of children who would go to America alone, without family, on an American kinder transport. I left my parents, my sister Leah, behind. I became a foster child in America for the next 5 years, living in different foster homes, learning English, making a new life. The letters from my parents stopped. I was sure they had perished. I cried myself to sleep. I felt very alone, lonely, desperate. And then the miracle and miracle. The war was over. A postcard came. My parents had survived, although they had been arrested a year after we left, were victims of many terrible concentration camps. We learned that Leah, as I had already mentioned, had been hidden, but also survived. So we are the very fortunate family, entire nuclear family, who managed to survive the Holocaust. Unfortunately, what was the Holocaust, as we know, has been followed by other genocides. 80 years after Kristallnacht, we have still not learned to stop killing each other. Nor has anti-Semitism gone away. Rather, it has again grown. It is on the increase. Having survived the Holocaust, I continue to have hope. Hope that in my life, anti-Semitism, if not eradicated, that there will at least never, ever again be another Holocaust. I would like to leave you with the words of Elie Wiesel, the survivor, terrible experience in concentration camps, who was the winner of the Nobel Prize for Peace in later years. Elie Wiesel said, "Whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness." That means you, ladies and gentlemen. It means you. Thank you very much.
So this is the trophy of the museum. This trophy, why it's our trophy? Because this is the only prayer bowl that we have found in the region, 2 hours from here, when the Jewish community were here, 2 hours from the city of Dubai. That has the Aramaic and the Hebrew and the Arabic language in the one bowl. It was the prayer bowl. It is the same prayer we pray it right now. And from the authorities, from the Islamic affairs, when they saw this bowl, they were so excited because they heard about this prayer and how the rabbis at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to pray for the Muslims to heal them, and also the Muslims used to pray for the Jews at that time. So we made this the trophy of the museum because this is the real glue of the true culture, the true success, of our civilization. We work together side by side. So we're going to present this award to our honorable guest, Eve Kugler.
I'm overwhelmed. I thank everyone, and I hope that anti-Semitism will be reduced, that we shall continue our friendship with the Arabic and Muslim community, and all of us, we must learn, and I think we will learn to live together, and let us pray for peace in the future, please.
Amen.
Paul Goldenberg is the senior representative of one of our sponsors, the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience at Rutgers University, and a former member of the US Government Homeland Security Advisory Council. He will share with us his thoughts on the very concerning rise in hatred and anti-Semitism that we are seeing in the United States and in Europe.
So I am a bit of an enigma. How does a Jewish cop from New Jersey stand here in Dubai? It is a tremendous honor for me to be here, seriously. When I made rank, I wound up getting an assignment from the Attorney General and the governor. And he said, listen, you have to wrap your arms around this thing called hate crimes, because we're seeing graffiti on the facades of religious institutions. Back then it was synagogues. I took it somewhat seriously, but local law enforcement did not. However, I was somewhat insulted that my division, which was involved in felony crime and organized crime and counterterrorism, was going to be taking on vandalism, was going to be taking on graffiti. I just want to share a quick story with you. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I received a phone call from a detective in one of our urban cities. He said, Chief, you got to come down here. We had a major vandalism at the cemetery. I said to him, you're literally calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell me to come out to a vandalism at 3 o'clock in the morning. Can't you send someone else to handle this? He said, I think you're going to want to see this. This was over 23, 24 years ago. He said, it's a cemetery that happens to be Jewish, and there are swastikas, kill Jews, 6 million more, scrawled across the tombstones. And again, I said, but this isn't even a felony crime. This is vandalism. He said, we went through the names of folks who were buried, the deceased in this synagogue. He said, Barney Goldenberg's name came up. Barney Goldenberg was my father. That changed things very quickly for me. I never felt that way in my life. I've been in some pretty dangerous situations in my life, and I will tell you, when I got in my unmarked car, I put my lights and siren on, and I wasn't even going to a call where there was a suspect on the other side. The feelings, I can't begin to tell you. I became that victim, that person. I understood for the first time in my life, who would do this? Who would do this? Years later, standing with John Farmer and others, where I traveled across Europe working in basically Jewish communities from Paris to Croatia to Sweden, I couldn't fathom that to enter a synagogue in Paris, France, a synagogue that was French, on French soil, with French people, Jews, that I had to go through 3 checkpoints, an armored personnel carrier, barbed wire, that we call barbed wire. How did we get to this place? This was just 7, 8 years ago. And I also said to myself, this will never happen in the United States. The worst we have right now is graffiti. We've had vandalism. We have had assaults. And lo and behold, flash to bang in a moment's notice. Organized massacre. Organized killing. People plotting, planning on the internet, on social media. How did we get to this place? I just can't believe it. I look at my 3 children. I cannot believe it. how did we get to this place? Where do we go from here? So we, working with Rutgers University, organized something called the Miller Center. And the Miller Center is something that we're extremely proud of. And we're here today to provide a different perspective, a different set of optics. People ask, where are the police? How are the police responding to these crimes? So I'd like to just have, and he's going to be a part of a panel. Carl, if you could stand for a moment. This is where the police are. The police have come a long way, a remarkable way. And the March of the Living has been absolutely an extraordinary place for us to better understand what the words never again mean, even to those men and women that wear uniforms today around the world. Because if they are educated and they very much want to participate and be a part of the process, then we've already, I don't want to say we've already provided a solution, but we've already provided a process that is extremely important to the words of never again. We have to operationalize the words never again. We say them, never again, never again. Okay, what does that mean? We have to operationalize it. And we can't do that without standing side by side with those that protect us. So where the Miller Center really focused, we focused on building capacity and building bridges of trust between Jewish communities throughout Europe and the police that are sworn to protect them. And there have been absolutely remarkable models out there. So we're very proud of the work because it's niche work and it's very different. And some people question, they said, aren't the police the problem? Well, if they are, we have to make them a part of the solution. And trust me, whatever you hear out there, they very much want to be part of the solution. This is a new paradigm. This is a new place. And many in law enforcement are feeling like victims themselves. There isn't a day that goes by that they're not being assaulted or murdered. And they are feeling the pain. And I think they understand what our pain has been. During times of crisis and other catastrophic events, it's the neighborhood congregations, the community outreach centers, the social service agencies, and other community organizations, the very fabric of democracies that are best positioned to become critical partners. And that's the message of the Miller Center. That's the work that we've been doing, and we're very proud of the work we're doing with the March. These communities are literally democracy's bedrock. They can't do it on their own. It's incumbent upon us to make sure that we not only don't forget, but we operationalize never again.
Please join us for a conversation on the topic, How to Build a Safer and More Inclusive Society, between Police Commissioner Karl Heeren, Chief of External and International Relations for Antwerp, Belgium, Mr. Scott Saunders, President of the United Kingdom March of the Living, Rabbi Eli Abadi, Senior Rabbi of the Jewish Council of United Arab Emirates and Chief Rabbi of the Association of Gulf Jewish Communities, and Rabbi Levi Duchman, Rabbi to the UAE. The discussion was moderated by Revital Yachin Krakowski, Deputy CEO of the International March of the Living.
I think, first of all, the Holocaust is known as a Jewish story, but it's really not just a Jewish story. It's a universal story. It's a story that all faiths, all peoples, from wherever they are in the world, can learn so much about what happens when hatred takes its course. And hatred has many different forms. And we've seen, you talk about never again, and obviously we've seen what has happened in Rwanda and Croatia and Cambodia since the Holocaust. It is incumbent on all of us, of all faiths, to learn those lessons, to work together, and to share what actually unites us rather than what divides us. And those are very, very important things. And I think the impact of when the imams come with us, the priests come with us, and the rabbis that come with us, when they go back to their communities and they spread those lessons. I appreciate that there is so much hatred, but bit by bit, we must work together across all faiths to try to make it better.
I had the honor to be part of the March of the Living several years ago, where I lit a torch and spoke. And so to me, to see an event like this here in the United Arab Emirates, it's something that speaks a lot about this country and this entire region. I think if we learn or analyze the reasons and the causes why Jews don't feel safe, maybe we could come up to the solution of how they could feel safe. The Holocaust would not have taken place had the Nazis did not find a fertile ground in Europe for the Holocaust to take place. The fertile ground of 2,000 years of children being fed anti-Semitism, children being nursed anti-Semitism, community and society being educated to be anti-Semitic and hate Jews. We need to educate the next generation, to educate ourselves, to educate everybody, to, in a sense, stop demonizing, delegitimizing the Jewish people.
This afternoon was quite an inspiring event where we had a few Emirati students together with Jewish students listening to the wonderful story of Eve. The UAE is home to over 200 nationalities, and there's many residents in this country where their home countries, they don't have a Jewish community. They don't have formal relationships with Israel. And when we here as the Jewish community have these events where we educate the people around us, the light that we could spread here in the UAE is not only to the United Arab Emirates, not only to the Gulf region, so way beyond that. So Ethan, I think your role here is way, way beyond and getting to many of the other countries in the area. And through this light, like many of you mentioned, through a little bit of light, you push away a lot of darkness.
I'm so glad that you will include law enforcement in this important process of education, because it's all about education. And you can go to school or to university and you can learn a lot, I'm sure, but by experiencing these traumas people carry with them, you can try to understand them. And by understanding them, you can have compassion. And you can have, how shall I put it, you can emphasize the feelings they, or the burden they carry. And for that reason, the Antwerp Police Department, like many other police departments and law enforcement agencies, we find it very important that education doesn't stop at university. You need to go out in the field and experience different things, different feelings. So, and we bring back home a lot of good ideas, and that's why we reach out to so many other organizations like the March of the Living, for example, to bring back experience and to educate our officers even better and make them experience this feeling. Because in Antwerp, I'm not sure if you know, we have a large Jewish community, a big Orthodox Jewish community, who have been, I'm sorry to say, but have been the subject of terrorist attacks since the 1980s. So it's something that the previous generation, the generation yet to come, will experience, that this burden is something they carry, and we need to not only understand it, but we will be able to fight it. And therefore, hate crime in general is a subject that the police department should address and include in the educational programs. I think all campaigns, and definitely this one, brings this message of hope, and this is in the reality where we live in today very important, to keep not only the memory alive through education, but also to spread the word and convince everybody that we still live in a wonderful world with a lot of good people, where in a lot of countries, a lot of people can be what they want to be. And hope is of the utmost importance, where we as a law enforcement agency try to inspire our officers that they should bring and spread this message of hope to the population we serve. And this is throughout the world, definitely here. And I'm very honored to be here in this wonderful country where they spread the same message. So congratulations for that, and let's collaborate all together in our wonderful world. Thank you.
Please welcome Mr. Ross Creel, Jewish representative to the Emirate of Dubai, for his concluding remarks on the topic of Holocaust commemoration in the UAE, significance for the Abraham Accords.
The Abraham Accords was an expression of diplomatic genius. Among many things that were brilliant about the Abraham Accords is the name itself, the Abraham Accords. The few diplomats and political leaders in those three administrations realized instinctively and correctly that the Abraham Accords was always going to be more than a purely diplomatic treaty between Israel and the UAE facilitated by the USA. It was always going to be an opportunity for the three great monotheistic faiths to reckon with each other, to have a family reunion, and to make sense of our history, our present and our future, and to do that out of the UAE with Israel. The second thing I want to say about the Abraham Accords is to acknowledge the fact of the risk that was taken by the United Arab Emirates in entering into the Accords. We as Jews need friends, and we need courageous friends. And the Emiratis and the UAE administration is exactly that. I want to finish by saying that the Abraham Accords has allowed us as Jewish community leaders to build Jewish life here in the UAE. As synagogues were destroyed during Kristallnacht, we are building synagogues here in the UAE. As Jewish businesses were destroyed in Kristallnacht, we are building Jewish businesses here, including schools and kosher restaurants. As Torah scrolls and Jewish books were desecrated, we are bringing Jewish books here into the UAE, and we hope and pray that through the vitality of our work as Jewish leaders, we will honor the memory of people that were victims and died and were affected in various ways by Kristallnacht. I'd like to finish with a short prayer with the permission of our host, a dear friend Ahmed Al-Mansouri, who is the very personification of everything that this night represents. May our courage match our convictions. May our integrity match our hope. May our faith in God bring us closer together. May our meeting with the past and the present bring blessing and hope for our future. Thank you.
We are now pleased to present our interview with 98-year-old Holocaust survivor Walter Bingham about his recollections of Kristallnacht and his reflections on that fateful era.
Walter Bingham was born nearly a century ago in Germany. He saw with his own eyes the buildup of hatred that led to the Holocaust, the worst crime in human history. Walter witnessed the book burning of 1933 and Kristallnacht in 1938, leaving Germany to the United Kingdom on the Kindertransport a few months later. Then he joined the British Army and fought the Germans. Today, we're honored to have the opportunity to listen to Walter's amazing life story at the age of 98. Hello, Walter.
Hello and shalom.
Great to have you with us. Please tell me a little bit about your life before the war.
Well, in 98, I was born in the beginning of January 1924 in a place called Karlsruhe, which is in southwest Germany. It was just a normal life in those days. It was the Weimar Republic in Germany. And then at the age of 6, I start going to school. And we didn't have a Jewish school. It was a ordinary basic school. And everything was wonderful at school. I was one of the boys and until Hitler came to power. And then the trouble started. And it wasn't very nice because I was the only boy in class usually. Sometimes there were 2 of us because there were not all that many Jews in the town. And if you know anything about bullying, they talk today, forget it, because what we Jewish boys had to suffer was far worse.
Did you experience anti-Semitism in the streets, in the public sphere?
When it progressed and Jews were no longer allowed to go to a cinema, to a theater, to a restaurant, everywhere were signs, Juden unerwünscht, Jews not wanted here, and it was printed in German, but in letters that resembled Hebrew print. And then, of course, you knew you couldn't go anywhere. A slow strangulation of life.
I want to take you now to November 9th, 1938, the night that is called Kristallnacht or Pogromnacht. Tell me about that night.
This Kristallnacht was well prepared. All the German officers had instructions what to do when they get the signal.
Yeah.
They were just waiting for the right time. I was in Mannheim, in that town. I lived in the Jewish orphanage because that was the only place which was kosher. Mm. And I walked from the orphanage to the synagogue, and the school rooms were for this 9th school year were behind the synagogue. And as I got near, I felt the atmosphere, and I saw, and when I got there, I saw crowds, and then I saw that synagogue burning, and people standing around. And the fire service was there, of course, but not to douse the flames of the synagogue, but to cool the neighboring property. Yeah. Property that was so it shouldn't catch fire, German property.
1,400 synagogues were burned that night. Stores have been vandalized and Jews were arrested and killed that night.
30,000 Jewish men were taken to concentration camps. And of course, all the synagogues in Germany, Austria, and the by then occupied part of Czechoslovakia, Sudetenland, were burned down.
You were one of the 10,000 Jewish children who were able to leave Germany after Kristallnacht on the Kindertransport. How did it feel to leave home?
That was a traumatic time. So my mother took me to the train. Your mother, I take it. Imagine, heroes. Imagine you take your only child to a train to send him far away. Couldn't speak much the language. And now there were children of 4 who didn't know what was happening to them. Mommy, Mommy, I love you. They thought they're being punished. They're in the train and the mommy's outside. It very, very traumatic. I suppose they gave us chocolates and sandwiches or something to. For me, at that time, I must say, it was a mixed emotions. There was, of course, the sadness of leaving my mother. But going on a big international journey somewhere, I'd never been on such an international train. But that was very, very, very emotional. It sank in later. You wave goodbye by the windows, and the parents were standing on the platform, and my mother waving. I can't imagine how she felt when the train pulled out. I get goosebumps telling the story. And she knew that it was going to be war. Everybody knew, and who knew what was going to be during the war.
What happened to your mother?
I must tell you, I was one of the very, very minute percentage who were reunited with their mother after the war.
Walter, arriving to the United Kingdom, what happened to you later?
I went to London and I went to work as a driver and said, oh, I'll go into the British Army. And the invasion started. And I went with a unit driving an ambulance, landed in the water. And it was not on D-Day, it was a couple of days later.
If someone had told you that one day you will be interrogating the Nazi foreign minister Ribbentrop, what would your reaction have been?
Well, I wouldn't have thought of it. But this man, Joachim von Ribbentrop, who used to be the German ambassador to the Court of St. James's, that is to the United Kingdom, he then, as the war broke out, went back to Germany and he became foreign minister. And the foreign minister of Germany was obviously in charge of everything that was happened in the occupied territories, including that the Einsatzgruppen, the groups who did all the terrible things about rounding up Jews, etc., that they all did their job. So he knew what was going on. We looked up for Nazis after the war, and he was caught in Hamburg. They knew, my colleagues knew I was Jewish, and they thought I'll obviously be interested in him. And they brought him into my office, a very small office, you can imagine, and I was only this Nazi foreign minister and I. And they knew I wanted to know about the final solution. That was the only term at the time. And I began to ask him, so tell me, Herr Ribbentrop, what can you tell me about the final solution? We spoke in German and he spoke in English. I can't recall which language we used. He spoke very good English. And he looked me in the eye, and in that tone he said, I didn't know anything about that. It was the Führer, which is Hitler, ja, mach schon mal. And at that point I knew he's lying. I could have choked him. But as I was factually a British intelligence officer, and as such I had to be British, stiff upper lip. And all I could do was look at him and ask questions. And I said to him, I see, but I guess you now heard about it. How did you find out? And he said he read it in the newspaper.
Are you concerned for the future of Holocaust memory as we see Holocaust denial and distortion on the rise?
We are living today in times like the 1930s. I really believe that. The only difference is that it cannot come to a final solution because we have the State of Israel. But everything else, the signs are exactly as they were, slowly, slowly, Jews being attacked in the streets, their shops being marked with Magen David, Star of David. Everything is the same. And people are walking in the streets in different countries shouting Jew. There is We are absolutely today in the 1930s, and it is only because we have, thank God, this state of Israel, which is stronger than most people think, that it can never happen. The final solution can never happen. How this is going to play out, I don't know, because particularly now, when the world is in economic crisis, it's a very good opportunity to blame it on someone. It is being blamed on the Jews, but the governments are not taking this seriously enough.
Do you think anti-Semitism will ever go away?
Anti-Semitism is a very good answer to people's problems. Until Mashiach will come, it will go on. It will. It's ingrained in history, in the people. You have to blame someone, and governments don't want to blame themselves for any crisis they get into, so they blame the Jews. It's very easy, very simple. I'm proud to be a Jew.
Thank you so much, Walter, for this fascinating conversation. I wish you health and that you keep smiling. Thank you.
It was a great pleasure to meet you and to relate that story, because it's very important. There will soon not be anybody alive who can bear witness. It will be read in books, and that's not quite the same.
We now take you to highlights from the Kristallnacht commemorations held jointly in Toronto, Canada, and Düsseldorf, Germany.
Good evening. My name is Rabbi Cantor Aviva Reisky, and it is my honor to welcome you to this evening's Kristallnacht program, taking place at Congregation Habonim in Toronto, Canada, and at the Johanneskirche Church in Düsseldorf, Germany. I am standing in Congregation Habonim, the first congregation in Canada founded by Holocaust survivors who arrived in Canada after the war, mostly from Germany and Austria, many of whom were first-hand witnesses to the events of Kristallnacht. The genesis of tonight's joint broadcast from Düsseldorf and Toronto was inspired by the story of one of our members, Jackie Altman, whose own father, Alfred Altman, was a first-hand witness to Kristallnacht and fled Düsseldorf in the aftermath of this horrific pogrom. Jackie's grandparents were later murdered in Auschwitz. But almost half a century after the Holocaust, the Altman family in Toronto uncovered a remarkable act of courage shown toward their family by Martha Schumacher, a heroic German woman from Düsseldorf. This story was turned into a short film, It Was the Right Thing to Do, commissioned by International March of the Living. Our program will begin here in Toronto with the Habonim Choir, followed by the screening of the film It Was the Right Thing to Do. Then we will continue with the memorial service from the Johanneskirche Church in Düsseldorf, Germany. First, the choir will sing Eli, Eli. Was written by the poet Hannah Senesh, who immigrated from Hungary to Israel, then called Palestine, in the 1930s, but returned during the war to fight the Nazis. She wrote Eli, Eli after a walk on Israel's shoreline near Caesarea. She was executed on November 7, 1944, at the young age of 23, but left behind this beautiful poem, Eli, Eli. The rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters. Please now turn your attention to the short and moving Holocaust film, It Was the Right Thing to Do.
After the Second World War, Germany attempted to bury its past. Public discussion about the atrocities committed by Hitler's Nazi regime were carefully avoided. In the 1980s, 50 years after the war ended, German cities invited back Jewish citizens who had fled or were expelled from the country in the 1930s. The visits were one way Germany began honestly reckoning with its past. My father, Alfred Altmann, was born in 1921 in Dusseldorf, Germany. Johanna, my father's mother, was a seamstress. She owned a successful dress shop in Düsseldorf's Königsallee fashion district. My father, an only child, lived above the shop with his parents. He escaped from Germany in 1939 to England. He never saw his beloved parents, David and Johanna, again. My dad made his first trip back to Germany in 45 years. A highlight of his trip was a visit to his primary public school, where he had been asked to speak. He took them through what had been a typical day for him when he would have been their age. Reconnecting with memories of his youth began his journey of healing from his painful past. A few years after my father's initial visit to Germany, the organizers of the event called him with urgency. They told my father about an elderly German woman who had come running in calling out, "Altmans, the Altman family, are they here?" She was waving in her hand an article about the return of Jews to Düsseldorf. She appeared desperate to find my father and had been searching for him for 50 years. Her name was Marta, and she said she had worked for my father's mother. She was not someone he had been close to, but he remembered her. August 1990, my brother David and I arrived in Düsseldorf, Germany to meet Marta. The door opened, and we saw an elderly woman sitting in a chair. It was one small room with a kitchenette, sofa, a table, and an alcove for her bed. She took one look at me, her eyes filled with tears. Johanna, for I looked exactly like my grandmother. Her story begins on the night of November 9th, 1938, the infamous night known today as Kristallnacht. She had been working in the house with my grandmother when my father and his father heard their beloved synagogue was burning. The two immediately ran out to the street to see what was happening. Soon after the men left the house, the brown shirts arrived. Marta described the horror and destruction they committed. These two women, seamstress and assistant, Jew and Gentile, lived and survived terror together. The synagogue had burned to the ground that night, but the men's absence from the apartment at that time had probably spared them from deportation. Once the soldiers were gone, Marta summoned her husband to help her gather from the street whatever was salvageable of their possessions. She and her husband carried mattresses and furniture to their second-floor apartment. It was astounding to hear how she matter-of-factly undertook these heroic steps at great personal risk to herself and her husband. Once a week, she would meet in a park. My grandfather would arrive with an empty suitcase, and Marta a suitcase filled with whatever food she could scrounge from her job at a farm. They would sit on a park bench and transfer the suitcases. Where the key class was would be notes usually marking the place they would meet next. Marta stood up from her chair and began to go to nooks and crannies in her tiny apartment, bringing out items. Look here, she pointed. See that on the painting? It is the mark from the Nazi's heel where he stomped on it. I understood that this woman had put herself and her family at risk, not once, but many, many times for my family. I tried to find the words of my gratitude. She looked at me straight in the eye and said, I did it because it was the right thing to do, and my daughter would do the same today. Marta did not have a life of riches, but her heart and actions were a treasure chest. She was the epitome of a righteous Gentile. She is a reminder to us that even in the darkest times, there are those who resist evil. She is a role model to me and to all of us who seek to build a better world. Her light continues to shine and inspires me every day.
We now take you to the Johanneskirche Church in Düsseldorf, Germany, for the memorial service.
Geschickt wussten die Nationen.
Truth of our history, that the great majority of Christians remained largely silent at the time, and that no public protest came from the church when the synagogues burned in 1938. When also here in Düsseldorf, only a few steps away from this church, apartments and shops were ravaged and destroyed. The crimes did not happen hidden away in secret, but they were visible to all, in public, in places that we still know today, that we still pass by today.
And
the people affected were citizens of the city, who were part of society, who lived and worked here, and who were made to understand at the time in no uncertain terms that as Jews they did no longer belong, that their economic existence, their home and their safety, even their lives, were to be taken away from them. I have been involved in Christian-Jewish dialogue for many years, but yet I have the impression that we still have not overcome some toxic traditions of anti-Semitism. But yet, as Jews and as Christians, we believe in a God who created us all, to whom we owe our lives, who has bound us all together as human beings. We humans can be so caring, lovingly looking after others, standing by each other, even in sorrow and suffering.
Aber wir können eben auch das Gegenteil.
But we can also do the opposite.
Unsere Freiheit missbrauchen.
abuse our freedom,
egoistisch verhalten,
behave
zerstörerisch
selfishly,
wirken
be destructive,
und anderen das
and
Leben.
make life hell for others.
Es liegt an
It is up
uns,
to us to decide which
auf
side
welche
we take.
Seite wir uns stellen. Heute,
Today, in this moment,
hier und jetzt.
in the here and now.
Amen.
Good evening. I am here once was large and vibrant, a family that lived for many generations on this continent, a family that loved and cared deeply for each other, a family who owned businesses, who worked hard and fought valiantly in World War I in defense of their homeland, a family who practiced Judaism, a German family who is no more. The Holocaust was an attempt to dehumanize and exterminate a people. My father, Alfred, survived an atrocity. But I want you to know, it did not leave him bitter or hateful. It left him with pain and sadness. Sadness for what he lost, a life he loved. Many Jews hold anger towards Germany and its people. As a young person, I never understood why he and his friends and family did not. Because in his heart, he was a Jew, but also a German who grew up loving his culture and refused to allow Nazi Germany to define the meaning of being a German. He understood, just as his fellow German survivors did, that the Shoah was a product not confined to one culture or people, but of the inhumanity of humanity. The product of what happens when hate festers, when we stay quiet until it is too late. As a Jew, it feels like anti-Semitism is as prevalent now as it was here in the 1930s, and it must be stopped. I came to Germany not to tell you never again, but hoping and expecting you would tell me never again, to hear the lessons you have learned, to hear how you teach your children the lessons they must learn, to show me how we stop this from happening again. And thankfully, I have found evidence of this during my time here. So despite all the anxiety and fears I had when I arrived, I now leave filled with a warm feeling in my heart, basking in the loving embrace of your friendship that allows me to say goodbye to Germany, filled with hope.
This concludes this evening's 2022 Let There Be Light program. Thank you again to our sponsors, the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience at Rutgers University, the Nijschloss Foundation, the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum in the UAE, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, Meta, and the Austrian Jewish community. Allow me to close with a blessing for all of us. Let there be light and peace in our homes, in our communities, in Israel and in the Middle East, and indeed throughout the world. Shalom.